this kind of technology has barely made any inroads whatsoever in modern agricultural technology. And again, all of these things, our ancestors came up with solutions to problems which we are facing right now. But we as a species, science as an institution, simply refuses to embrace what our history is. And as a result of that, we're confronted with problems which are purely of our own making because we think we're facing them for the first time, whereas actually the solutions have been in place for decades, centuries, in fact, millennia.
And actually, as human beings, we've always been like this, but now with advanced technology, it makes it a little trickier. We can't afford any mistakes.
Well, I think there is. I think one of the things which the last few decades have told us or taught us is that we are sufficiently self-afraid of self-destruction on a global level. Definitely, the Cuban Missile Crisis during the Kennedy era in 1962 showed that when it really comes down to the wire, it's almost like human error or crazy stumbling, which would push us into self-annihilation. But that is when it comes to purely, contained political actions. When it comes to disasters, whether they are from, an ecological nature or from something else, then it's clear that we are not in control of the ride right now. We are not, looking towards resources like oil or electricity or things like that, food, from a sustainability perspective, from a how are we going to be feeding ourselves 100 years down the line? How are we going to provide ourselves with energy 100 years down the line? What is driving this economy is short-sighted, money-hungry politics, and that is not, of course, the correct way to go. And that could have a disastrous effect down the line, even though for the immediate future, these kind of problems don't really come to total clarity.
Yeah, some of the things that are going on the planet right now, I simply cannot understand. There seems to be a point if you follow any line of research where it drops off and makes no sense whatsoever. And the only thing I can think of is that some people on this planet are so asleep and so embedded in the old regime, and unfortunately they have control of the military too, that it's going to be a matter of a lot of us getting together and stopping supporting that system. So I was just wondering, what do you feel about the? Do you think we're actually being observed by aliens right now, and do you think they're going to return at a key point in our history?
I think again we think we're alone. We think we are somehow, there's this idea about the zoo hypothesis. It's something which an awful lot of people have been talking about. It's great material for science fiction story writing, and basically it's that somehow we are in quarantine or we are surrounded by a big wall, and that nobody is allowed to come in because somehow as a species, as a planet, we are in this exile. Maybe because we haven't reached the correct level of technology or for whatever reason. I do not believe that. I believe, that our history shows us, that our history books show us, that our ancestors tell us that there have always been non-human intelligences out there which contacted and helped our ancient civilizations, but also our modern civilizations, that they are there at our beck and call, and that we can call upon them whenever we so want to do so. I was privileged enough to spend a limited amount of time with Terence McKenna before he disappeared. Jeremy Narby is a dear friend of mine, and it is clear that there are still indigenous wisdom traditions out there in the world which have maintained this contact with these non-human intelligences and are able to, make us aware of the fact that we are not alone, which is precisely what our ancestors were saying as well. I mean, in the ancient alien question, one of the things I hope I have underlined is that um, when we look at this idea that whether or not we have been visited by non-human intelligences, the The academics will say that there is no evidence for this whatsoever. Yet our ancestors, whether it's the ancient Egyptians, the Inca, or the Mexicans or whoever, say that this is absolutely not the case. That we've had contact with non-human intelligences throughout history. That we've walked this path of civilization alone, and it's only now that we are, somehow believing, tricking ourselves into believing that we are alone. And this is something which is getting to disastrous proportions because up until about 1850, pretty much everybody in parts of Scotland believed, for example, in fairies, believed that we were not alone, that we were surrounded by non-human intelligences. Up until 1910, everybody believed and practiced pretty much across the world the belief that we could contact the dead. It was, nothing unusual whatsoever to be part of a seance whereby the dead were contacted. And the likes of Professor Archie Roy and the Eager Dead have done tremendous experiments in writing their book. Have done tremendous efforts in writing their book about the so-called cross correspondences, which is an experiment in which basically people who were absolutely interested in researching whether or not there was something to life after death, that when they died, they were going to make their absolute best to try and communicate with the living. And the end result is the cross correspondences. And Archie Roy in The Eager Dead has gone into that in tremendous detail and has basically come away with, incontrovertible evidence that there is such a thing as life after death. Doctors in operating rooms across the world are reporting anomalous events happening with people who are on the brink of death. Science as a whole refuses to look at it. And so what we have is a world whereby, we should be aware of the fact that there is such a thing as a soul, that there is something which continues after death, where there should be a knowledge of the fact that we're not alone in the universe, that we can communicate with these non-human intelligences on a daily, individual, mundane basis. But again, we believe that we are unique. We believe that we're special. We pretend that there is no evidence for this, and we laugh at people who believe in these kind of things. And the problem is that believing in a soul and believing in life after death, truly at this moment in time, is a matter of belief because science straightforwardly refuses to look into this. Science is getting away not so much with murder, but with death. Because they refuse to look into these things. And as a result of that, more things are piled onto belief, and the bailiwick of religion becomes ever larger because science refuses to look at these things. And that's a crime. That's a crime against humanity, and it's a crime against basically the entire world, because what happens is that once again, we are confronted with a scenario whereby we think that we know our position in the world and the universe, but that what we constantly walk through, constantly everyday reality for us is vastly different from the true reality which is out there. And unfortunately, we might come up with gigantic conspiracy theories, whether it is, the Bush administration or Illuminati or whoever, who are in control of these things. The simple fact of the matter is that it are scientists who are able to dictate their own playing field, who are able to dictate their own rules, and the world as a whole. Politicians, men in the street, kids, fathers, children, wives, everyone lets them get away with it. They're the ones who are principally responsible for settling us with a completely twisted worldview. And that is one of the greatest crimes of this time, which is causing so many problems. And also one of the greatest crimes of this time, which I think is unfortunately not identified.
Yeah, everyone lets him get away with it except Terence McKenna.
Unfortunately, Terence
Yeah,
departed to the other side
yeah,
about 12 years ago. So,
yeah. It was. He opened my eyes. I have a background with cornderos, taking mushrooms, being in South America, taking ayahuasca, and a little while back I took some DMT, and it was an eye-opening adventure to say the least. And it really dawned on me why it is that the establishment does not want any research happening around hallucinogenics that will take you into an interdimensional reality. Because it could be that we have this whole thing wrong as far as alien intelligences. They could be on a completely different dimension right here, right now, and maybe not particularly just coming from a UFO from the sky.
Well, I think it's an end universe. I think there have been physical contact with non-human intelligences, and I think those are far and few between. But yes, this contact with a non-human intelligence on a daily basis. Terence McKenna, I remember in 1995 in Freiburg at a conference whereby you had the likes of Jacques Vallée and the late Bud Hopkins, um, and he pointed out to them that he had been on those spacecraft and that he knew what those UFOs were, and he was going to tell them what they were, and to a large extent he did, but. I think it's very important that we also understand once again something which has changed between our far ancestors and today. Um, our ancestors across the world left traces of temples, and these temples were not churches; they were places of initiation. And they were places where our ancestors went to, and they had a direct experience of the divine, whether it was through taking DMT, whether it was through some other kind of method, and as a result of that, they had a direct experience. They had a meeting with the ancestors, with the gods, with a non-human intelligence, whatever you want to call it. They came away with knowledge, with an awareness that life was larger than the things we saw on an everyday basis, and that reality was far more complex than anything which we could see with our eyes, could hear with our ears, and the rest of our senses. And that is something which over time disappeared, specifically in the last 2000 years. Um, Coming riding with Christianity, it's actually Christianity, I think, is the greatest culprit, but they were not the ones principally responsible for it. It began about 150 years before Christianity, when a Roman Empire decided that all the oracles of the dead, all the places where people went in search of making contact with the divine personally, were closed down. And then by the time when it became Christianity, it basically said that, contact with the divine was through a priest. Everything which we knew about the divine was written down in the Gospels. We merely had to consult it, which of course only happened after something of a revolution in the 16th century, when people actually were allowed to actually read the Bible for themselves, because before it was the exclusive bailiwick of the priest to interpret and decide for you as to what had to be understood and appreciated from within the Bible. But the fact of the matter is that two millennia long, we have basically elongated ourselves from experiencing the divine. And it's the likes of you and several other who go in search of faraway places quite often to take these substances and have these experiences, to come away with an understanding that we can experience the divine. Jesus himself actually said, if you want to experience God, close the door to your room, and meet him inside. Gnosticism was all about having a direct experience of the divine directly. Again, this is something which history, has changed, and we think once again that the divine is something which is, untouchable for us. That we hold the stories of Bernadette Soubirous, who sees an apparition of something which we've interpreted as the Virgin Mary at Lourdes, as something very, very weird and very unique. But truly, encounters with the divine once used to be pretty much as common as taking a train or boarding a plane. Everybody at one point in their life was going to do that, and the methodology behind it was so carefully and well crafted that it was something of when I say mass consumption, it's basically they had down the techniques to give everybody who so wanted to have such an experience of the divine. Again, today this is pretty much an alien landscape. We do not understand these things, and